Yo me quedo sí, va, eso
seeing it? Well, perfect way. Can we watch like on TV watching
No voy a hacerla, que no se puede. Pues a mí me sale esta Margarita, Robles.
Un segundito, darle ese espacio.
Claro, no tenía más.
Presidente, por favor.
Por el centro, bueno.
Tú eres el más joven.
Majestad, Presidente del Gobierno, Secretario General de la OTAN, presidentes del Gobierno, predecesores en la Secretaría General de la OTAN, Presidenta del Congreso, Presidente del Senado, Presidente del Consejo General del Poder Judicial, Vicepresidenta, ministros, ministras, embajadores, señoras y señores, buenos días, bienvenidos a la celebración del 40 aniversario de la entrada de España en la OTAN en el Teatro Real. Muchas gracias por su presencia en este acto conmemorativo de la adhesión a la Alianza Atlántica, un día como hoy, 30 de mayo de 1982. Comenzamos con la interpretación de la obertura Leonora número 3 de Beethoven. Ahora tiene la palabra el presidente del Gobierno, Pedro Sánchez.
Majestad, secretario general de la OTAN, Jens Stoltenberg, presidenta del Congreso, Meritxell Batet, presidente del Senado, Ander Gil, presidente del Consejo General del Poder Judicial, Carlos Lesmes, presidentes del Gobierno, Felipe González, José María Aznar, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, exsecretarios generales de la OTAN, William Claes, Javier Solana, Lord George Robertson, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, vicepresidenta, ministros, ministras, alcalde de Madrid, embajadores permanentes de la OTAN, embajadores y jefes de misión acreditados en España, autoridades, señoras y señores, hoy estamos celebrando y recordando una fecha muy especial para nuestro país. El 30 de mayo de 1982, España se convertía en el miembro número 16 de la Organización del Tratado del Atlántico Norte. Cumplimos, en consecuencia, 40 años de alianza con un grupo de países que comparten esa forma de estar en el mundo que llamamos democracia. Sociedades que hemos elegido gobernarnos desde la libertad, desde la justicia, la igualdad y el pluralismo político. Esta pertenencia cumple una misión trascendental, sobre todo en estas fechas. Nos permite ser lo que somos y, además, garantiza que seremos lo que España decida ser. Porque no hablamos solamente de una alianza militar, con ser esto evidentemente importante, sino de una alianza entre países en defensa de los principios que originan la prosperidad y el bienestar de nuestros pueblos. Para todos nosotros, aquella adhesión supuso mucho más que un trámite multilateral. España comenzaba entonces una nueva andadura y también, yo diría, exitosa, tras décadas de oscuridad y de bloqueo como consecuencia de la dictadura franquista. Y lo hacíamos entonces llenos de esperanza, de fuerza, pero también, lógicamente, con incertidumbres que muchas cosas nacían de inercias y temores provenientes de nuestro pasado más reciente. La incorporación que hoy celebramos se debió en buena medida al esfuerzo conjunto
was due to the joint effort of the then President of the Government of Spain, Calvo Sotelo, and the then Secretary General of NATO, Joseph Luns, both now deceased. So today I would like us to also remember them together with President Adolfo Suárez. But the young democracy that we were wanted more. We first had to recognize the heated debate in Spanish society about the joining of NATO and the terms under which Spain would participate in NATO. And it was President González who very bravely took on the challenge of asking our citizens for their opinion about staying in the alliance with a referendum. The outcome, more than 52% of votes in favor of staying, made Spain the first NATO country that had decided to join it by popular vote, legitimating our entry, the entry that today we commemorate. And Spain wanted to decide on its own, and it decided something that was very simple, to return to our natural area in the world order, a space of safety and security and progress, a space of guarantees that protected it against any challenge that would endanger our more recently reconquered freedom. Afterwards, it was President José María Aznar who took it one step further, and Spain joined the military structure of NATO, and it was an initiative that coincided with Javier Solana's mandate as Secretary General of NATO and implemented by his successor, Lord Robertson. After this integration, on January 1st, 1999, our country became an active member of the command structure of NATO. In 20 2010. The new strategic concept of Lisbon was approved, which still guides the alliance under the presidency of José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, leading its participation in its preparation. However, the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 totally changed the picture for which this strategic concept was created, as it was set forth at the Wales summit, in which President Mariano Rajoy and Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen were participants and leaders. Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, very many of the protagonists of these last 40 years are here with us today, and I very wholeheartely thank them for their the effort of coming to Madrid, and that this has marked paved the way, and it will be the second time in our history that a NATO summit will be held in in Madrid, Spain's capital. Spain has lived its membership in a very natural way. It has been most natural. Together, we have taken on, with success, the challenge of modernizing our armed forces. We have known how to use this opportunity with a great degree of commitment and professionality. In addition, Spain has made contributions that have been ever-growing in a very significant way to the alliance, committing units to the response forces and participating in most operations and missions. NATO has helped us to forge Spain's relationship with the West, and especially the transatlantic bond that I think has become even more important today with the United States and also Canada. And in addition, NATO has contributed enormously to a basic public good to which we attach ever-growing importance: safety and security. The democracy of our societies, the prosperity our citizens enjoy, above all, require security, because if not, we are in danger, and all our basic collapsing, and these last tragical months, we've seen this with our own eyes. We are confronting it's probably been the greatest challenge to NATO in its recent history, and also the European Union of such importance to Spain, but in general to the international order we built in these last decades, the atrocities committed in the war in Ukraine, the brutality of the destruction, the unjustifiable death of innocent victims lead us to condemn without all the actions of unreservedly all the actions of President Putin in a violation of international law. He will not achieve his objectives. We have shown him, and we will continue to do so, that our support to Ukraine is most robust and that it will not fail. From the beginning, we have left it very clear that our unity, our cohesion amongst ourselves, the allies, is the best deterrence that NATO has to prevent an escalation of the conflict. Because unleashing this war has been the only way that President Putin has found to put a stop to the legitimate aspirations of the countries that believe in democracy, in the rule of law, in respecting human rights, solidarity, and peace. And he's done so for one single reason: because the threat that democracy poses to him, to his authoritarian regime, is all that matters to him. And that's why the enemies of open societies that we, the allies, defend can make the right decisions and define our most immediate future. The first is to preserve the unity of all of us who believe in democracy, in rule of law, the international order that is rules-based and that protect our civil rights and freedoms, our political rights and freedoms. The ties that unite NATO allies with EU allies and many other members of the international community are born from this shared feeling of justice and equality and express determination with which we are going to defend our principles and values. And also it is essential, therefore, this union to strengthen our security. The war in Ukraine has opened the eyes of our societies, also Spain's. Many people have understood that our safety and security are not guaranteed in an indefinite way. The worst conditions can happen very quickly before our eyes and bring everything down, our reality. And that is why it is necessary to make a coordinated and daily effort to preserve it. Now, our security is threatened by Putin's regime, and we need to support the Ukraine in a resolved and decisive way. This is the only way to ensure the future of Europe. The world we have built has a future, and it is essential that we reinforce our deterrence capacity, and that requires modern, capable, and available military capabilities that can only be acquired by increasing our investment in defense. And we are very aware of that, but I also know that this is something that we need to convey to our societies, that we do need to make that effort, because the cost of not doing so is what is going to endanger our freedom and our model of peaceful coexistence and democracy. One of the main consequences of Putin's war, contrary to his strategic objectives at the beginning of the conflict, has been this renewing and revitalizing the Atlantic Alliance. In a few weeks' time, we will be holding here what may perhaps be one of the most important and transcendental summits in its 73 years of existence. In Madrid, we will be defining the strategy of organization, the strategic concept for the coming decade, with the candidacies of Sweden and Finland, two consolidated democracies whose contribution to the Atlantic Alliance will be of enormous value. In addition, it will be the time to together promote the 660-degree strategy to project a powerful message once again of unity and complementarity between the European Union and NATO, a union that today is even more essential to the defense of our model of coexistence, because there is no other way. If we want to offer a legacy of freedom, democracy, and peace to the coming generation, our children, our grandchildren, we must make decisions that reinforce our alliance and endow it with the tools and capabilities that are required.
Los desafíos que tenemos por delante. Tenemos que mostrar, en definitiva, nuestra determinación de hacer de la Alianza Atlántica una alianza más fuerte y más eficaz en el siglo XXI. El nuevo concepto estratégico, el concepto estratégico de Madrid, es nuestra primera oportunidad, y yo la calificaría de meditada y también consensuada, para afrontar ese futuro con decisión y ayudar a responder a los nuevos retos,
to respond to old threats that we thought in Europe we had overcome forever. I would like to point out that this new strategic concept is not going to limit itself to the conventional military sphere. Because of the growing importance of hybrid threats, climate crisis, food emergency crises, and others, and which will go, this strategic concept will go well beyond that. The organization of the summit is an enormous responsibility, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, for Spain, which takes on this responsibility with pride and being very aware of how important it is. But we also understand that it is a great opportunity to show Spaniards the advantages of having belonged to the organization for 40 years and sharing with it the strategic debates us for the future, because there is a long way ahead in the future that we need to cover, and we want to do so together, hand in hand with our fellow citizens who we defend and with whom we share our lives. So 40 years later, those of us who have inherited all the efforts of preceding presidents of the government and secretary generals that are with us here today, we can guarantee that belonging to NATO is fundamental to guarantee what we are, our way of life, our stability, and our future. We, the Allies, have chosen to be on the, we could say, bright side of history, defending peace, international law, and doing so out of conviction and with no fear, promoting everything that we the Allies defend, which is a world that is more just, more prosperous, and safer. So, happy anniversary, and thank you all very much.
It is a great honor to have the Secretary of NATO amongst us. Please welcome Mr. Jens Stoltenberg to the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is really an honor and pleasure to be here today with you to celebrate 40 years of Spain within the NATO alliance. And I would like to thank His Majesty King Felipe for his strong personal commitment to our transatlantic alliance, to our armed forces, and to our security. In the late 1970s, after dark decades of dictatorship, Spain sought a new path, one committed to freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, values that lie at the heart of the NATO alliance. And in 1982, Spain became our 16th member, proudly joining a family of free, democratic nations across Europe and North America. And let me thank my predecessors who join us today. Willy Claes, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, Lord Robertson, Javier Solana, and Jaap de Hoop Scheffer, who could not be with us today. You steered our alliance through 4 decades of incredible change. From the height of the Cold War to the fall of the Berlin Wall. From the Balkans Wars to 9/11, and from Afghanistan to the illegal annexation of Crimea. Throughout these 4 decades, Spain has stood united with its NATO allies in maintaining security across the Euro-Atlantic area, protecting our people and our shared values, and helping to change and adapt our alliance every time the world changed and new challenges arose. With both Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts, Spain holds a vital strategic position, resting at the crossroads between Europe, Africa, and North America. It is both a border between continents and a bridge between cultures. As such, it plays a central role in protecting us from threats from all points of the compass. Your membership in NATO has made our military more modern, more capable, and more deployable. Over the past 4 decades, Spain has contributed greatly to our alliance. You play a key role in NATO's missions and operations. Spanish forces have helped maintain the stability of the Western Balkans through NATO missions in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. They contributed over many years to our mission in Afghanistan, and I thank and honor all those who served so bravely there. Those who made the ultimate sacrifice, and their families and loved ones. Today, Spanish soldiers are a crucial part of NATO's training mission in Iraq to help ensure Daesh never returns. Spanish pilots take part in Baltic air policing. Spanish sailors serve in our maritime missions, and Spain hosts the Aegis ballistic missile defense ships in Rota. This shows that together we are ready to defend every inch of Allied territory from any threat, from any direction. Whenever I have met with Spanish service women and men, I'm always impressed by their dedication and professionalism. I met some of them recently with Prime Minister Sánchez when we visited NATO's battle group in Latvia, serving alongside Allied forces from both sides of the Atlantic. NATO solidarity in action. And therefore I would also like to thank Prime Minister Sánchez for his personal leadership within our alliance. Pedro, your commitment to transatlantic security is and remains vital. And also many thanks to your predecessors for their support of NATO over many, many years. In response to Russia's brutal and unprovoked war in Ukraine, Spain is playing an important part in strengthening our deterrence and defense, deploying additional troops, ships and jets to strengthen NATO's defense of Europe. You are also providing critical support for Ukraine with security assistance and humanitarian aid to uphold Ukraine's right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter, help end the war and achieve the peaceful solution that Ukraine deserves and we all want. Back in 1997, Madrid hosted an historic summit. Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic were invited to open talks to join our alliance. Former adversaries became new friends. That summit marked a new age of hope and aspiration. NATO's open door and the European Union's enlargement helped spread freedom, democracy, and prosperity across Europe. It was and remains an historic success. Next month, Madrid will host another historic summit. This time, however, the context is very different. Not a fresh burst of freedom, but a cold blast of conflict. Russia is waging war of aggression against Ukraine. Authoritarian regimes seek to undermine the rules-based international order. China's coercive policies challenge our interests, security, and values. And China has joined Russia in openly contesting the right of each and every country to choose its own path. We also face brutal terrorism, instability from the south, sophisticated cyber attacks, disruptive new technologies, nuclear proliferation, and the security consequences of climate change. Together, these challenge our security and our democratic way of life. At the Madrid summit, we will chart the way ahead for the next decade. We will reset our deterrence and defense for a more dangerous world. We will deepen our cooperation with like-minded countries and organizations, including the European Union and countries in the Indo-Pacific. We will also be joined by Finland and Sweden, who have just made historic applications to join our alliance. The Madrid summit is an important opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to NATO's values and the vital importance of Europe and North America working together in NATO. As we look to the future, Spain will continue to play a key role in our alliance, because in this age of increasing global competition, our unity is our strength. Thank you so much.
Now it's my honor to invite the secretaries to the stage. Good morning, Mr. Lord Robertson, Mr. Willy Klaas, Mr. Javier Solana, Mr. Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Good morning. Today we're very proud to be celebrating the anniversary of Spain's entry into NATO. 40 years have passed since the historic protocol formalizing this membership was signed. Modern Spain is explained by its determination to position itself within the European institutional architecture. Its democratic transition culminated with entry into NATO and the European Union. Belonging to the Atlantic Alliance has helped consolidate Spain as a committed ally in political, strategic, and operational matters, and as a partner loyal to the principles of cohesion and solidarity amongst the 30 member countries. During this time, Spain has changed profoundly, and with its entry into NATO, it joined a group of allied countries with which it shares values, principles, and interests. For this reason, multilateralism is a key plank in our approach. As the Spanish generals underlined, wherever there is a NATO flag waving, there is a Spanish soldier. Our country has come a long way from the first mission within NATO in 1992 up to the recently announced deployment in Lithuania. This will mark the second time Spain hosts a NATO summit. The first was in 1997, while Mr. Javier Solana was Secretary General, and now we're proud to be hosting a summit at such a crucial historic moment for our democracies, a transcendent summit, as the President Sánchez just mentioned. And today we have managed to bring together some of the main protagonists of these last 4 years in NATO to hear about your experiences in office as former Secretary Generals. So please, Mr. Willy Klaas, in office from 1994 to 1995. I would like to hear you about about your reflection of this anniversary. You want to start, Mr. Solana?
Sure.
I will prefer, Mr. Klaas, to follow the chronological order.
Okay. Now, thank you very much. Your Majesty, it's a great pleasure to be here celebrating this anniversary. The Secretary General of NATO has mentioned that Spain had already another summit in 1997. In that summit, three very important decisions were taken.
Se tomaron tres decisiones muy importantes.
That we should not forget is that we created in that summit the Council NATO-Russia. And the third thing that we created was the NATO-Ukraine Council. So we had an idea at that time of how things could evolve. Unfortunately, those councils were evolved. Unfortunately, those councils were going down in interest along the time, and we couldn't finish the ideas, the fundamental ideas that were taken in Madrid. Now, if I were to talk to you very frankly, as I should, I think that at this point in time, the most important thing that the people which are gathered here, it would be to ask clearly and logically for a ceasefire immediately in the capital, Kiev. Then get rid of the government, and then appoint a government that will avoid President Putin. That has not taken place. Therefore, I think that this is the moment his objective to try seriously to have a ceasefire. His objective to try seriously to have a ceasefire. And for that, all of us, all the countries represented here, have to make an effort because we should be able to do it. I remember a few days ago when I hear that the Secretary of Defense of the United States, in the first conversation that had with the Secretary of Defense from the Russian Federation was, we need to construct a ceasefire. I would like very much to really sum up my voice to that conversation of the two Secretaries of State from Russia and from the United States. That would allow the people of Ukraine to recuperate their lives, to look forward for a while at least, and to really the political side of Ukraine also to get together and turn into what we can be the exit at the end of this ceasefire. But for me, the ceasefire is a must, and whatever we can do, we should do it.
Please feel free to continue.
Okay. First of all, congratulations Spain, congratulations NATO. During my mandate as Prime Minister of Denmark and Secretary General of NATO, I worked closely with three presidents of the Spanish government, Aznar, Zapatero, Rajoy, and I appreciate very much your during my tenure as Secretary General of NATO, we conducted 6 operations. During my tenure as Secretary General of NATO, we conducted 6 operations on 3 continents. We adopted a new strategic concept. we developed a new approach, smart defense, to get more value for our defense money. We prepared a readiness action plan to strengthen our territorial defense in the east, and we decided that all allies will live up to the 2% target before 2025. And under current security circumstances, that is more necessary than ever. We made NATO fitter, faster, more flexible. That's exactly what we need now. Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine has taught us that we cannot take freedom and democracy for granted. We will have to fight for it. And the Ukrainians have the will to fight. We must give them the means to fight. Heavy weapons, and we must stop the financing of Putin's war by a complete stop to import of Russian oil and gas. If the Russians stop fighting, we will have peace. If the Ukrainians stop fighting, we will have no Ukraine. So the Ukrainians are fighting on behalf of all of us. That's why I say, with the Ukrainians, Slava Ukraini.
Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, 2 or 3 considerations. First of all, the regime in Moscow we are facing today can be compared with the darkest period of the Stalinist period. So the situation is dangerous and even unpredictable. So, conclusion has to be, it is our duty to reinforce NATO capabilities and to enlarge Finland, Sweden, even if this is not, in my opinion, to say it as the French are doing, a petit cadeau, adding 1,300 kilometers of frontiers in Finland with Russia. Mr. Secretary General, you will face some military and strategic problems in doing so. But it is your duty, and you have to support this. Second consideration, I have the feeling that this conflict will provoke a fundamental geostrategical change in the world. We cannot exclude the risk of a new structure in which authoritarian states are confronted with the democracies. Let us look very attentively what Beijing is doing in trying to enlarge the little coalition of the BRICS. It can be the start of an adversary structure towards the West. So once again, our answer has to be a reinforcement of NATO. Last consideration, of course, we have to do all what is possible to help our Ukrainian friends, and I think it's time to reinforce the the weaponry Ukraine is asking for. And I know there are some doubts because one cannot negate the military capabilities of Russia. My last consideration, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we are underestimating the evolution of modern weapons in which modern technologies have been integrated. So humanity is facing serious risks. So nevertheless, we are obliged to support the Ukrainians. We have to find a point of contact in which we will discuss the control of weaponry and, in a second step, the disarmament. I think it is inevitable on the moment that we are supposed making big efforts in order to save our climate. But let's not forget the risks we are facing with the combination of weaponry and modern technology. So, thank you.
Your Majesty, Prime Minister, thank you kindly for the invitation to come here and celebrate 40 years of Spain within NATO. When I came to NATO in 1999, I followed a Spaniard as the Secretary General. The most visible demonstration of Spain's incorporation into this alliance. I recall the ratification procedure in the British Parliament. I was a very new and young member of Parliament when we endorsed the membership of Spain in NATO. And for those of us who had some memories of the dark days of dictatorship in Spain, that was an amazing feeling to have. And then to come to NATO and to follow Javier Solana in the position of Secretary General was quite a move forward for me. I was also able to appoint a Spaniard to the first senior military position when I appointed General Ortego to be the commander of the Kosovo force, the commander of KFOR. I don't know whether the general is in the audience here tonight, but he was a superb representative of his country. So here we are celebrating 40 years of Spain's membership of NATO at a time when we are now welcoming 2 new applicant members for NATO in the vanguard of the Madrid summit. I have to say that I spent 4 years trying to persuade Finland and Sweden to join NATO, and Vladimir Putin managed it in 4 weeks. And they will enrich the alliance tremendously, this alliance of free nations covering 1 billion people, like-thinking people in the world today. And never was there a greater challenge to the NATO alliance than we face at the moment. The unprovoked attack by Russia on Ukraine is something that has changed geopolitics fundamentally and perhaps forever. And as somebody who got to know Vladimir Putin in his earliest days, who signed with him the Rome Declaration in 2002, his signature on the Rome Declaration endorsed the principle that every country had the right to make its own decision about its own security. A commitment like so many others that he's broken, from the United Nations Charter through the Budapest Memorandum, the NATO Russia Founding Act. He's broken the one that he himself signed that day. And I don't think it is for us, any of us in NATO today, to decide at what point the Ukrainians will stop fighting. Our obligation is to ensure that the Ukrainians have the ability to fight against the aggression that is taking place in their country today. And that is why I endorse the views that have been expressed of giving the Ukrainians the means to fight, the heavy weapons, the training of their troops that is so desperately needed at the moment in order to counter the onslaught of the Russian forces. And let them decide at what point they stop the fighting and start the discussions with anybody else in the world today. Our great alliance of 30 countries, and soon to be 32 countries, is facing perhaps its biggest test, and yet with an absolute resolution that we stand for freedom, for liberty, and the right for countries to make their own choice today. So as we celebrate 40 years of this great country being part of the alliance, let us ensure that in the future we can guarantee for the people of Ukraine the same rights that we celebrate protecting here today.
You all agree that this moment is crucial, transcendental, historic, and dangerous also. I know it's hard to do predictions, but based on your experience, how do you think it will evolve? In the short term, at least.
I think the biggest risk is a prolonged conflict. And we have to make sure that Putin does not get a success in Ukraine, because he won't stop. If he gets success in Ukraine, next victim might be Moldova, then Georgia, and eventually he will also put pressure on the 3 Baltic states. We have to make sure that Putin does not succeed in Ukraine. And if Russian troops do not leave Ukraine, then we will get into difficulties in rebuilding Ukraine. Because as long as Russian troops in Ukraine, you will still have war, because the Ukrainians will not surrender. That's why actually we have to kick out the Russians from Ukraine to get peace, a lasting peace, and to engage in a comprehensive rebuilding of a new Ukraine. And that's actually what gives me hope, that we have a chance to rebuild Ukraine, not only buildings, infrastructure, etc., but also politically, to get rid of corruption and the oligarch system, to build a new, solid, free democracy. That would be ultimate success.
I think that for the European citizens that may be worried and some scared maybe about the possibility of having in Europe an extended war that goes beyond the present war, I think we have to tell them that if that were the case, it will not be, NATO is there to defend us, because the members of the European Union today, most of them, all of them, are members without Austria, the only one, but once Sweden and Finland enter, the whole of the European Union will be part of NATO. And therefore it will be a defense for whatever happens by NATO to the European citizen. So the European citizen may be, if I may say, I'm going to say relaxed, but thinking that they will have be defended by the Europeans and by NATO. But I think that the European Union people are concerned not only about the possibility of an attack on their homes, but are concerned about the consequences of the war in their own lives. And if you think, for instance, that the level of prices of oil, of gas, are going up, tracing to levels that we didn't expect as a cause of the war, it's important that the war is ended as soon as possible in order to give the prices of oil to come back to the reality that it should be today. The second thing that I'm concerned about is the consequences of the war outside the European Union. And I'm not thinking on the rich countries of the world, but I do know very well at this point in time the level of hunger in many countries of the world is increasing. Poverty is increasing in the world, and it's increasing because Ukraine and Russia exported around 30% of the food that is eaten in the world, and today it's not being exported. So the sooner we can get that food, which is in the soil of Ukraine, the better for the rest of the cities of the world. So I think that the second claim that I will do for today is to guarantee, to ask the two sides, in particular the Russians, that they allowed the export through the sea with Ukraine that doesn't have any port at this point in time, Odessa, and the possibility of getting that food, which is in there, to be transported to the countries in which that is needed. That will be another sign, important sign of what is NATO about. We are concerned about war, we are concerned about those who are fighting, but we are concerned also of the consequences that may have in the rest of the world. And therefore is the most vulnerable of the world people which are suffering now from the hunger. And I think this should be another preoccupation when we gather in this type of meetings, another preoccupation to think about. And I would like very much make a statement in that sense.
I fully agree with the comment given by our Danish colleague. So we cannot permit Putin to obtain a victory, because he will not stop there. He will have following steps. So indeed, we have to increase our military efforts for the moment. I know what I've said in my first conclusion. It is in paradox with what I'm saying now, but indeed we have to stop Putin. Afterwards, maybe we can be inspired by the conclusions of the so-called Normandy group. That means that the eastern provinces of Ukraine will be Ukrainian territory, but giving some autonomy and respect for the Russian language, because there is a problem. Let's be clear. Second idea, I know we are speaking NATO, but let me say one word about European Union. We cannot go on with the rule of unanimity concerning foreign policy and even fiscality and so on. We have to change fundamentally this. So what the European Union is urgently needing is the deepening of the structure and the disappearance of this stupid rule of unanimity, even in the dialogue with Washington. Because I'm not so convinced that the short-term objective of Washington is the same as the Europeans are developing. So what we need at that point is a common foreign policy in Europe, and that needs the disappearance of the unanimity rule, which is a very serious handicap for all those who have been a member of the European Council of Ministers. So that you know all the difficulties we have met there. That's my second conclusion. What we need much more than ever is a Europe speaking with one voice and acting as one person. That's a necessity.
I'm not going to follow that to its logical conclusion, because foreign ministers today are meeting in Brussels trying to seek unanimity on an oil embargo. And let us hope that they arrive at unanimity, because the pressure on Russia needs to be more considerable than it is today. Of course, we are all paying the price for Russia's aggression. The rise in inflation, the effect on food production, supply chain disruption, all of this has had a dramatic effect. And we have an obligation as politicians, or even those of us who are yesterday's men, to get over the message that price is worth paying. Because the Ukrainians are not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for a principle, and that is the right of self-determination and the right of people to live without the threat of being invaded and crushed by a neighbouring country. So there is that obligation to do much more to get the message over. The second thing is that we need also to offer to the decent people of Russia a prospect that after this episode in their lives, there is a role for Russia in the world still to play. The majority of the Russian population are being denied any information about this war, denied even the right to call it what it is, a war. And when the scales have dropped from their eyes and they realize the brutality and the horror of what Russian troops are inflicting upon their fellow Slavs in the neighbouring country, then they will realize just what Vladimir Putin has brought to them. So offering them a prospect for Russia in the future is something we need to get across. During the Cold War, we used every mechanism possible to get a message through the Iron Curtain at that time. And eventually people realised beyond the Iron Curtain that there was a better life out there, and these countries are now inside the alliance, inside the European Union. So we need to get that message across to the Russians, that what is happening in their name is unacceptable and something that the world is simply not going to tolerate. In the meantime, a very heavy price is going to be paid for all of us, while we continue to give them the moral, financial and military support that will be necessary for them to win this conflict.
Before concluding, the nations of Europe, the European citizens, are living this situation with great concern and are wondering how peace and security can be guaranteed. What message of hope can you transmit to the citizens of the Alliance?
Well, the hope that we can express and hope that it will be accepted by the majority of the people is that the world today is very complicated, that we are seeing even the beginning of deglobalization. We may have even the possibility, the drama of having a world decoupled, and those things will be very dramatic, I think, economically, politically. So we have to recreate, to see how we recreate step by step some of the things that we have lost. I may be a classic, or I may be an old-fashioned thinker, But I do think that foreign policy should be based on having all the channels of communication always open. That is what we did, that was what I did, and I'm afraid this is not what is being done today.
Yeah, on a very tragic backdrop, I also see some light at the end of the tunnel. One thing is that Putin has managed to create a stronger NATO, stronger unity among Europeans, stronger unity across the Atlantic, the transatlantic alliance in the broad sense of word has been strengthened. NATO will soon be joined by Finland and Sweden. And actually, I'm very happy about that development against a very tragic backdrop. And as I indicated previously, I also think it gives us a chance to actually rebuild a new Ukraine. I've met a lot of young Ukrainians, and they are talented, well-educated people. They are longing for a new future without corruption, without all the oligarchs to dominate the public life in Ukraine. And it gives me hope that once this war is over, and one day it will be over, once it's over, then we can start rebuilding really from scratch a new Ukraine. And finally, it also gives me hope that I think not only the young generation, but several generations now have learned a lesson from history, that appeasement with dictators does not lead to peace, but to war and conflict. I think we can get rid of the naivety that has dominated our relationship, not least with Mr. Putin. I've met Putin a lot of times, and I have learned the lesson. He only respects one language, the language of force, strength, unity. And that's also what gives me hope. Once this war is over, I hope that we can develop a new, more sustainable relationship between the West and Russia. We need that.
Maybe that I'm going to make some remarks which are less sympathetic, but what is the attitude in the world today towards the sanctions? Of course, China is not playing with us. That's not a surprise. But do we understand clearly what India is doing? Increasing the energy commerce with Russia factor 4. Indonesia, president of the G20, is not implementing sanctions, on the contrary. South America, let's be clear, Mexico, Argentina, even Brazil is not very enthusiastic about the sanctions we have taken. South Africa, Southern Africa is not playing with us. In the assembly of the UN, where there was a vote about the sanctions, 17 member states of the UN of Africa didn't vote with us. 17. Can we have a discussion on the attitude of the Arab countries, and especially Saudi Arabia? The situation is very complicated, and as I've said, at this moment, unpredictable. Nevertheless, we have to maintain more than ever the solidarity both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States, Canada, and Europe. A united Europe, I insist, a united Europe, speaking with one voice. And once we have established peace in Ukraine, and I understand what you say and fully agree, we have to do together all what is possible to rebuild that country. We have to think clearly how to develop the new geostrategical links in the world. And it is a very complicated challenge. For the moment, as me concerning, unpredictable and very dangerous. But having said that, first things first, let's take the measures necessary to help our Ukrainian friends in order to stop Putin. If we take the risk to give him some victory, he will continue. That's clear. So we have to stop him. That's clear. Thank you.
I strongly agree with that, and Vladimir Putin has succeeded in several ways that he never intended. He's brought a new determination and unity among European nations. He's bound the United States to Europe in a way that he thought he could break, and he's persuaded 2 new nations to apply for membership of NATO. That is a signal failure in the objectives that he set out. He's also managed to remind our populations of just how important national security, national resilience is, and how important the NATO alliance is as well. Because the NATO alliance is not, as we know, simply a military alliance. It's a political organism which has over the years achieved much. I've got a very vivid memory of my time in NATO, not just in declaring Article 5 for the first time, but with Javier Solana intervening in what was going to be a civil war in what was then called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And at the end of that year, when Javier had created a peace agreement, the Ohrid Agreement, and NATO had disarmed the insurgents at the time, we went down to the Tetovo Valley and were greeted by large numbers of children there who wouldn't have known the difference between NATO and the EU or Aldi or Tesco, but who knew that something big had happened and something had arrived. And these young children in mixed villages there would today be refugees if that war had not been stopped by a combination of a military alliance and a diplomatic superpower at that time. And it's remained in my mind. And last year I went back for the 20th anniversary of the Ohrid Agreement and met some of the people, the insurgents of the time, and was introduced to them by the now Minister of Interior of North Macedonia. And it's a huge pleasure to have the permanent representative of North Macedonia here today. So we've reminded people, and Vladimir Putin has reminded people of the importance of the organization and how vital it is to all of our safety and security. So all of us ancient representatives of the Secretary General class wish the current incumbent of the job all our best wishes and good luck for the year that he's got ahead of him. This is maybe the best time not to be Secretary General of NATO. But we wish you all the very best, because as Willie Claes has said, we live in a very complicated world where the geostrategic kaleidoscope has been shattered, and we don't know where the pieces will land. And you and the members of the North Atlantic Council will have huge responsibilities in the year that is coming to ensure that safety and security is guaranteed in the way that 40 years of NATO have done so for Spain.
If I may add, let's follow clearly what's going on in Bosnia, where Putin is playing a strange role in Serbia, and one cannot exclude that we are going to new conflicts in Bosnia, provoked by Serbia, which signed a new agreement with Putin last week for 3 following years. So the situation even in the Balkans is still preoccupying.
We have some new problems, but some of the old ones are still with us.
We have to leave the discussion here. It was really very interesting, very exciting, inspiring to listen to you, and I thank you all for participating. Thank you so much.
What a pleasure to see you. You have played the bad. Okay. Yeah. It's a bit complicated. Yeah.
Tiene la palabra Su Majestad el Rey.
His Majesty the King has the floor.
Presidente del Gobierno.
President of the Government.
Presidenta del Congreso de los Diputados, Presidente del Senado.
Speakers of the Senate, President of the Judiciary Council, former Presidents of the Government of Spain, former Secretaries General of NATO, Ministers of the Government, Ambassadors, permanent representatives to NATO, allies all, the chairman of the military committee, civilian authorities and military authorities, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we come together to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Spain's accession to NATO, a historic step in our successful transition to a modern democratic society that enabled us to fully join the European, Atlantic, and in short, international political spheres. This is a very special moment for our country, and it is a great honor for me to be able to celebrate it with some of the main players who contributed to the success story from their different spheres and positions. Of course, from NATO itself, the presidency of the government of Spain, the ministries of foreign affairs and defense, and the military, and the North Atlantic Council, which on this occasion has traveled to Madrid to expressly participate in this event with us. Many thanks to you all for your presence and company.
Ambassadors, thank you for your presence here today. And thank you for giving us such interesting insight and wise thoughts about your experience, but also about the situation we're facing in our world today. Lamentablemente, las circunstancias que rodean este aniversario.
Unfortunately, the circumstances surrounding this event are not as we would have wished. Russia's unacceptable aggression against Ukraine reminds us, and does so most tragically, of the immense value that peace, security, and democracy have in our lives. In these circumstances, we are united by our support for Ukraine. Because what is at stake is not only its sovereignty and territorial integrity, as we've heard, but also hundreds of thousands of innocent lives, the peace of the entire European continent, and, by extension, the rules-based international order that we have all contributed to building over these past few decades. Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, 40 years ago, the Spanish flag was raised for the first time alongside the flags of NATO and 15 other allies at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. That the sight of our flag being raised was more than just protocol. It was profoundly symbolic. Our country had started walking along the path that we had chosen to walk by and together with those nations who also believed in freedom and in human rights and in shared security. Spain always understood that being a member of the alliance was much more than just merely joining an international organization, that it was and it continues to be the backbone of our collective defense and deterrence efforts and the strength behind European defense. It also meant embracing the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law enshrined in the preamble of the Washington Treaty, which Spain and its society had already adopted with profound conviction when it approved by a very broad majority our constitution, a fundamental charter that had marked the way for our open, democratic, and modern society, the Spain we are today. Being a member of the alliance meant bringing our future as a nation to that of the Euro-Atlantic community, a bond that would be even further strengthened when we joined the European communities nearly 4 years afterward. With the hindsight of these past 4 decades, there is no doubt that our accession marked a turning point in our history as a nation and in our future position as a trustworthy state in the international community. Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, together with the political dimension to which I have just referred, I believe that it is also necessary to highlight the profound transformative implications that joining NATO has had for Spain's armed forces in our defense culture and structure. And I say so because I know it from the inside when I began with my military training as a cadet in the military academies of the different services. From having armed forces that were historically dedicated to securing our borders, we have evolved toward a model encompassing traditional territorial defense and collective defense, in addition to other defining elements of our armed forces, such as interoperability, combined action, joint operational planning, and capabilities. I would also like to point out, and I do so with pride, that by accepting Spain's request for accession, NATO strengthened its political and military dimension and gained greater strategic depth. If Spain has benefited from the security provided by NATO, from its modernizing impact on our military capabilities, and from the international status conferred by being a member, NATO, for its part, has availed of Spain's strategic location and of its commitment in terms of military and conceptual contributions, but also of our distinct and enriching strategic perspective. In 1982, the alliance welcomed a country that combined robust Atlantic and Mediterranean dimensions, together with profound European convictions. A country that has always looked towards the north, the south, the east, and the west. One that has always embraced the Atlantic Alliance as part of its identity, of its culture, and of its history, and of its outreach as a nation. And because of all this, Spain is a country that attaches great strength to the transatlantic link, which, as I had the opportunity to state in my speech to the North Atlantic Council in November 2018, does not date back to 1941, the year of the Atlantic Charter, or to 1949, the year the Washington Treaty was signed, but to a much earlier date. Our transatlantic identity dates back to the late 15th century, when Spain first came into contact with the Americas. Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, here today I would like to highlight the participation of our armed forces in the different Allied activities, missions and operations over these past 40 years. For Spain, offering the alliance the service of the men and women of our Army, Navy, Air Force, our Civil Guard, has been and still continues to be an extremely important commitment and a true honor. And this is only possible out of a firm conviction in our shared principles and values in the defense of a freer and more humane world. And please allow me here to pay my deep and heartfelt tribute to those who have given their lives over these years, as well as to their families. We shall never forget their dedication and sacrifice. In 1 month's time, Madrid will once again host a NATO summit exactly 25 years after the one held in 1997, and at which for the first time after the end of the Cold War, 2 years later, the doors opened to the Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland, paving the way for a successful enlargement that has led to our current community of 30 allies. Now, the war in Ukraine has united us around our values, and NATO must recover that same spirit of 25 years ago. As in 1997, Madrid will once again be host to a decisive summit, which will be held on the 29th and 30th of June. In this regard, I am most grateful to the Secretary General and to our 29 allies for placing their trust in Spain. We have undertaken this project with the greatest sense of responsibility and fully aware of the historic dimension of this upcoming summit. As demanded by the strategic circumstances, Spain will spare no effort in guaranteeing its success. The geostrategic reality so requires. Conventional threats are being compounded by emerging threats, traditional challenges by unprecedented challenges, and they are coming to us from every strategic direction and appearing in every operational domain. Spain fully agrees, and even more so at the specific moment in time, agrees with the crucial importance of maintaining a robust defense and deterrence component on our eastern flank. As you know, Spain is honoring this commitment not only on paper but also on the ground. We are contributing with significant capabilities, land, air, maritime, but our collective security also requires that the alliance pay ever closer attention to the challenges of its strategic direction south, where the jihadist terrorism is directly threatening our societies, and moreover, where other actors, both state and non-state actors who do not share the values enshrined in the United Nations Charter, are attempting to do so indirectly. And do please allow me in this regard to stress that the city that is so proud to host you today and that will do so again in barely 1 month's time suffered the most terrible terrorist attack on European soil in terms of lives lost. That tragedy strengthened Spain's conviction that only through the dedicated work of the law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, and the armed forces, together with a firm commitment to multilateralism, international cooperation, unity, cohesion, the rule of law, and solidarity with our allies, always in the framework of the rule of law, I insist, will we be able to defeat the terrorist threat while always keeping alive the memory of the victims. The Madrid summit must produce the tools and responses that the alliance needs to address all the shared challenges, beginning with a new strategic concept, the Madrid strategic concept, to serve as an effective guide and beacon for the coming decade. Spain will contribute to the ultimate goal of ensuring that the alliance that emerges from the summit is stronger than ever, even better prepared to collectively face a new and more complex security environment in a more effective and efficient way, because it is going to be much more complex. To achieve that goal, and as an EU member state, our country is also convinced that we will only be truly successful if we build an effective partnership between NATO and the EU. Both organizations face the same threats and challenges. So only working together, strengthening and complementing each other, will we be able to create the strategic synergies that are necessary to address them effectively.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the Spain of 1982, NATO meant the future. Now in 2022, Madrid will lay the foundations for new NATO's future. It is crucial that we rise to this historic challenge, and I am convinced that together we will succeed. Muchas gracias. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all very much. Muchas gracias.